There's nothing harder than being the new kid in town.
You live here?
Who's this?
The boys did have somewhat of a bad reputation.
Stick your foot in.
What do you think you're doing?
When childhood pranks get out of hand,
Allegedly, these kids broke into his house.
He moved there to be in peace. Now they're saying, how can we get rid of them?
Somebody's got to teach these children a lesson.
entire families turn against each other.
Your kids are terrorizing my son.
He said, I'm the only one that can protect my family. I'm the only one that can protect my property.
Neighbors become monsters.
He just snapped. He went into a rage.
Get out of here.
I was terrified.
Stop the driver!
Welcome to one of the most peaceful places under the sun.
Tamarack, it's a city located in Broward County, southern Florida. It's a good community. They do not have a high crime rate. It's a good neighborhood.
Oh, I love the weather. Usually around 75, 80 degrees, always sunny. Who could really hate that?
For Richard Day, his wife Adele, and his 12-year-old stepson Walter, Tamarack is exactly what they're looking for. The Days have just moved to our neighborhood.
No, it wasn't the deal.
Yes, it was.
My mom had met my stepdad in Baltimore. His mother moved to Florida, and they wanted to be closer to mom, so we moved to Tamarack.
The climate in Florida was pretty good for Richard. Being an older guy, it was probably pretty nice not having to shovel a bunch of snow or anything.
There was a canal in the back of my house, which was awesome because I loved fishing, and it had anything from catfish to really, really big largemouth bass.
So, kiddo, what do you think?
There's just one thing wrong.
Where we lived in Tamarack, Florida, it was our retirement community.
I'm sure there's going to be kids your age in the neighborhood, I promise.
I was maybe one out of a handful of families that actually had kids.
Just give it some time, okay?
Here, hack it up, bring it in.
Come on, sport.
So it was pretty quiet.
It was a senior community that had just let some younger families in.
Richard easily gets work soon after arriving.
He was an auto body mechanic and was really into classic cars, and his work was really good, too.
You're late. Long day?
Same old, you know.
My mom and dad were definitely your typical American couple.
Yeah, your hands are filthy.
They were very loving.
You're horrible.
Where's Walter? I have something for him.
Oh, he's in the basement in the rec room.
The caring father does his best to make up for Walter's lack of friends.
Hey.
Hey, Dad.
How was school?
Okay.
Good.
Me and my dad got along pretty good.
I have a surprise for you.
Really?
Yeah?
What is it?
Well, close your eyes.
I used to think of my stepdad as a big guardian. I knew he was in the Air Force, so I used to relate any type of military as being strong and things like that.
And open them.
Seriously?
Yeah? What do you think?
I thought you said I wasn't allowed to have a knife.
Oh, well, I think you're old enough.
Thanks, Dad.
You're welcome.
From what I understand, Richard couldn't afford that much.
Take care of it. It wasn't cheap.
Okay.
So your mother is cooking dinner upstairs. Why don't you go and help her?
All right.
All right.
You know, he really couldn't. He did the best he could by his son.
It's a quiet life. But all that is about to change.
Hey, Walt. You live here?
Yeah, hey, Anthony.
Anthony was a buddy of mine in school. I found out that he lived in my neighborhood, which I thought was cool because I didn't really have too many friends there at the time.
Walt, from what I can remember, he was a pretty laid-back kind of kid.
Who's this?
Mom, Dad, here's some guys from school. This is Anthony, Andrew, and Mike.
You guys?
Hey, guys. You guys all brothers?
Yeah, we live around the block. Want to come over? Grab your bike.
Can I?
All right, just for about an hour, and then we'll pick you up. Hey, helmet.
He wasn't a real swift kid. He was kind of slower. There wasn't that many kids. You know, we didn't have a high variety of different children to hang out with. We had to hang out with who was there.
Come on, hurry up, let's go. Come on, boys, let's go! That's when there's a...
For Walter, finding 3 new friends is like hitting the jackpot. But it won't be long
Andrew, come on!
before these friendships unravel and rip apart our neighborhood.
Unfit to be a mother!
Right now, everyone welcomes the burst of youthful enthusiasm.
The Rossers lived about 4 houses down from us. They had a family of boys. They seemed to always travel in a group.
Yo, guys!
I always told my wife they were like a clan, and boys, you know how boys are.
Yeah, right. Come on, Walt, hurry up. Mom, Dad, this is Walt. We're gonna go whip him on PlayStation.
Hi, Walt.
Let's go, come on.
Walt, make sure you get a turn, huh?
The Rosser boys live with their mother, Connie, her brother, Robert, and their father, Fred.
They were super close. I mean, Robert, he was like their dad. And there was a very strong connection between them there.
Things aren't quite as strict in the Rosser house compared to Walter's.
We definitely were a handful. Me and my brothers were very tight, very close when we were growing up.
They liked playing video games, liked riding bikes and fishing, and I like doing all those things too.
Finish the level, please. Hey, guys, settle down. Why don't you let Walt have a turn?
Uncle Rob was a real laid-back, relaxed dude, man. He would go to work every single day, come home, drink his Budweisers, and yeah, he'd hang out with us. Definitely more of a peacemaker than a fighter.
No, it's not. We have to get...
All right, enough!
She was a tough cookie, my mother. When she raised her voice, we definitely stopped doing what we were doing.
Sorry, Mrs. Rosser. I don't mind if I don't play.
I mind, Walt. Everyone gets a turn. I'm glad that somebody around here has some manners.
The boys did have somewhat of a bad reputation.
You know, rough around the edges, to put it diplomatically.
Come on, Walt. Your dad's here.
All right, good. Bye, guys.
See you, Walt.
Still, Richard and Adele are happy their son finally has some buddies close by.
Richard.
Hi, Richard.
Nice to meet you, Connie.
This is my husband, Fred, my brother, Rob.
Hi. So, did you have fun, kiddo?
And these are my boys.
Hey, Dad, can we go fishing with them sometime?
Yeah, sure, well.
Richard does his best to foster Walter's new friendship.
You know, there are gators in there.
Anthony came up with this idea that, hey, there are alligators in here.
Yeah?
Yeah. Dare stick your foot in.
No way.
Come on.
Andrew was at least a year older than me. He would usually be the antagonist.
Come on. Stick your foot in. Come on.
Hey, stop!
Put your foot in. Stick your foot in. Well, come on.
What do you think you're doing? Stop it!
Richard was kind of like a grumpy, angry guy when I was a kid.
It's time to go home.
Short fuse. Definitely had a short fuse. I didn't think we were troublemakers. We were doing what kids would do. We were being kids.
When Walter returns home later that night, however, he discovers something missing from his tackle box.
This was one of the really early things that happened. I had either let one of the Rosser boys use my pocket knife, and it simply either just got pocketed or something.
Take care of it. It wasn't cheap.
Hello, Andrew?
What's up, Walt?
Hey, I just wanted to ask you. Do you know what happened to my knife?
What knife?
My fishing knife. Well, I used it this morning, and now I can't find it. You know what happened to it?
No idea.
All right, well, if you see it, just let me know.
Okay, cool. Bye.
Thanks.
I left it there. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I just kind of let it go.
Walter may be reluctant to stir the pot,
Everything all right?
Yeah.
But Richard is already skeptical of the Rosser boys and isn't the kind of guy to back down from a fight.
I understand neighbor disputes. It happens all the time. And this one here just started with some minor things.
Put that back now!
And continued to grow.
Dad, look!
They festered, and they kept festering, and they kept boiling.
Our neighborhood was pretty safe. You didn't have to worry about anything. The occasional mosquito bite, that's about it.
After moving to sunny Tamarack, Florida.
Hi, Richard.
Nice to meet you, Connie.
The days are happy to meet the Rosser family around the corner.
Hi. So, did you have fun, kiddo?
And Walter is excited to have found new friends in Mike, Andrew, and Anthony. But his father, Richard, has his doubts about them.
You know, there are gators in there.
Come on!
Come on, just
do
put your
it.
foot in. Hey, do it! Come on!
What do you think you're doing?
I'm sure he was mad about it, but I didn't have that many friends, so I kind of wanted to keep the peace for as long as I can.
Just as Richard starts seeing red flags, life takes a sudden and drastic turn for the worse.
Richard, are you okay? Richard, what happened? Richard, Walt! What's going on? Walter, call 911 now! Go!
My dad had a quadruple bypass, which is pretty scary.
Is it two of the red and one of the white?
No, it's two of the white and one of the red.
He deteriorated after that. He went through, I mean, all sorts of really, really bad stuff.
Here.
I'm gonna have to quit, aren't I?
The recovery period was rather long, and it did put him out of work.
We'll get by.
Richard is forced to give up his job as an auto mechanic. Now it's up to his wife, Adele, to make ends meet.
Are you gonna be okay?
Yes, I'm gonna be fine.
All right, you have my cell number, you have the shop number in case anything happens.
Yes, I have everything. I'm gonna be okay. I'll be fine.
My dad would definitely want to be the breadwinner of the house.
Okay, so you are going to mow the lawn.
He would see it as being kind of inferior, him not working.
And then you're gonna go get the groceries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me get you money.
Oh, what are you doing? What are you trying to do? Humiliate me?
He kind of felt like he couldn't provide for his family. So you could tell that it would kind of eat at him, not working.
I'm sorry.
You need to get something to eat.
He's always had a quick temper, but Richard's poor health makes it worse. And a weak heart isn't his only challenge.
Richard had diabetes, and it was causing him more problems. He would have bouts of low blood sugar, which, you know, takes a toll on a person.
He would typically get very irritable. He wished he could get back to work. Being around the house was driving him crazy.
Now his irritability is about to be tested by his son's new friends.
I wanted one really bad, and my dad had got me a Game Boy. I brought my Game Boy to school, and I wasn't definitely supposed to have it, but I did it anyway.
Have you guys seen my Game Boy?
Oh, you mean this one?
He kind of shook it.
Come on, give it back.
Come get it.
Want to give it back to me.
Come on. Oh, what are you gonna do?
Teenagers are always going to be knuckleheads.
Come on, Andrew.
Because they've been knuckleheads since teenagers came about.
Andrew, come on.
Pass back, pass back. See you later, Walt.
Anthony?
I was definitely upset. It was a brand new Game Boy.
Next time, we're stealing your bike.
Things were definitely escalating with me and the Rosser boys. My mom was pretty protective of me, and she had gotten a guidance counselor involved.
It's just a joke.
It doesn't take much for the adults to turn on each other. And Connie Rosser doesn't think her son's prank is worth all this trouble.
Honestly, this is a total waste of my time. Can we go?
Connie said that the son was a spoiled brat and that instigated or further fueled the fire.
Come on, boys, let's go.
You know, they stole Walter's knife as well, and we'd like that back.
Despite the accusations and hostility between parents, Walter doesn't want to give up the only friends he has.
I had it in the back of my mind that that was not kind of cool, but kind of wanted, you know, just to have somebody to hang out with.
Me and my other brothers used to go over there every once in a while. We'd hang out.
Anthony and Andrew were at my house, and there was these things called Beanie Babies. I had quite a few of them.
Hey! The hell do you think you're doing?
My stepdad thought that he saw them stuff things in their pocket.
What?
They would always accuse us of stealing something.
Put that back now!
Basically, he told them, "What the heck are you doing?"
Walter, I told you, these kids are trouble. What are you thinking inviting them into my house?
Put those back and get out of my house.
Get the hell out of here. Both of you, get out and don't ever come back.
I just remember him constantly screaming.
Relax, buddy. I was just looking at it.
You and those two, you're done.
After that incident, my parents were pretty much like, that is it, do not hang out with them anymore.
But it's not long before the burnt hand finds its way back into the fire.
There wasn't a lot of people in my neighborhood that I could actually interact with, and it kind of sucked. So I did kind of sneak over to the Rosser's house. The Rosser boys, they had like this tray. I had noticed that a few of those Game Boy games were actually mine. Put them in my pocket and eventually left with them.
All right, guys, it's getting kind of late. I think you should head home.
See ya. Yeah, see ya, Walt.
You have the audacity to call my son a thief?
What?
Maybe you should look to what's underneath your roof.
That is out of line.
I'm way out of line. Are you listening?
News of the missing games makes it home before Walt does.
Your son just stole from my children.
Excuse me?
Connie basically called my parents and told them that I had stolen some Game Boy games.
She's like, look to your own kid. Your son's no angel.
So maybe before you go around.
Okay, hold on, look, he's here now. I'm gonna talk to him. Walter, what have you done?
What?
That was Connie on the phone. Something about some stolen Game Boy games?
But they're mine. So I just took them back. Here, look. These are the games that I took from their house that have my name on them.
They were labeled, so I showed my parents, like, hey, you know, these were mine. I was just taking them back.
That's it!
Richard, calm down.
No, Adele, I have had enough of these people.
For Richard, this is the Rosser family's third strike. It's not about the kids anymore. Now it's about the parents.
He's enraged. It's not a slow burn. The only thing I can think of is that he felt, screw this, I'm the only one that can handle this.
Came to my mother's house and started beating on the door.
How dare you accuse my son of stealing when it's your stupid brats who are the thieves?
Crazy, Richard.
He was immediately just snapping, screaming as loud as he could.
Freak out,
Am I crazy? Are you kidding me? Your kids have been terrorizing my son!
They're going back and forth.
For weeks now!
It infuriated me.
You humiliate me, my children.
You're trailer trash!
It was shouting. You could tell there was anger.
Oh, my Lord!
I heard Richard Day cussing out Connie.
You are unfit to be be a mother.
I'm not even talking to a woman like that. I verbally abuse my children.
That's enough. Please leave now, Mr. Day.
You know what? You people disgust me.
I was definitely pissed off at Richard when he spit my mother's face. And I definitely held a grudge after that.
Uncle Rob may have ended this fight, but the war is just beginning. And our neighborhood will never be the same.
I tell you, I was so afraid. I felt something horrible was gonna happen.
It was a ticking time bomb. This is a quiet cul-de-sac in Tamarack. It's a great city, low crime, nice area. This doesn't happen.
Trouble between Walter Day and the Rosser boys has become a war between two families. Richard Day has finally given Connie Rosser a piece of his mind.
Hey, Richard! You're not fit to be a mother.
A lot of people have spats. On this one here, I would say, oh my God, breathe.
You know what you are? It's called trailer trash.
Take 10 deep breaths, you know, count to 10.
You people disgust me.
A line has been crossed, and that puts the final nail in the coffin.
My friendship with the Rosser boys was done. It was over. We were no longer friends.
Our whole neighborhood is on edge, but no one is prepared for what happens next.
With this particular incident, we came home from dinner.
That's weird. I'm sure I left the porch light on.
Hello? Is there anybody here?
Oh my God.
What the hell happened?
Dad, look!
Someone had broke into the house.
Their home is completely trashed. But despite the damage, only one thing is missing.
My bike's gone.
What?
My bike was not in the house anywhere. It was definitely gone. I was devastated. I loved that mountain bike. It was brand new.
You can say all you want.
Next time, we're stealing your bike.
You know, you can plot all you want. There's a line you don't cross.
Oh, I know damn well who it was. These three kids, these three brothers, they live just around the corner. They have been tormenting my son ever since we moved in here.
Richard is certain who's done this, and he lets the police know it.
And there's been a couple of Game Boy games gone missing.
Allegedly, these kids broke into his patio. Allegedly, they had stolen his son's bike.
And I caught one of them red-handed trying to steal something from my own home.
Doesn't have any proof, but because of everything that's going on, he feels it's them.
My dad was super, super angry.
Jerry, take a look at this.
What is it? You found something?
There was a fingerprint found on the glass that didn't belong to any one of us.
Despite the lead, time passes and nothing is heard from investigators.
Police never got back into contact with us. Nothing ever came of it.
So Richard takes steps to defend his home and his family.
My dad went to a hardware store and got a few no trespassing signs.
Richard Day said, you know what? I'm looking around, and I'm the only one that can protect my family. I'm the only one that can protect my property. I'm the only one that can protect my son.
His actions only provide more ammunition for the Rosser boys.
Hey, Gramps.
He was the only house in the neighborhood that would have signs in the yard like that.
Some pretty heavy-duty security you've got there.
They're teenage boys, and They taunt Richard Day.
Sure that mount's not too heavy for you?
They do. They're disrespectful to him.
They kind of grinned and snickered and said,
And Walt, too bad about your bike.
Richard, don't! Richard Day, get back here right now! Richard!
Get out of here.
I think it takes a while, though, to build up to that point. You know, to build up the time bomb. You know, you've got the fuse, you know, this long.
Walt?
Adele manages to pull Richard back from the brink, but nothing can stop hostilities from escalating.
Come on, let's go.
Can you just tell me what it is?
It's a surprise.
Come on.
Once again, Richard tries to make up for his son's lack of friends.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you sure?
I'm positive.
All right.
Oh my gosh, are you joking?
after my bike got stolen, my parents bought me another new bike.
Exact same one as your old one.
So I was pretty happy about that.
Well, what do you think?
It's awesome, thank you.
You're welcome, buddy. Well, go ahead and take it for a ride. Be careful, stay on the sidewalk.
Walter's gift leads him down the street to his next surprise.
Hey guys, nice bikes. Thanks. Do you live around here? Yeah, just up the street actually. I'm Fabian.
He makes some new friends.
Yeah, I'm Walter.
Too bad he can't avoid his old ones.
Andrew saw me hanging out with my friends.
Hey, you guys new?
Yeah, just moved in.
Hey.
And he saw me with my new bike.
Brand new bike, eh?
Yeah.
Can I take a look at it? Come on. I'm just looking at it.
He had asked me to let him see it.
Come on, I'm just gonna take a look at it.
Sure.
Thanks, sucker.
He tried to take off on it, so...
What do you think you're doing?
Get lost!
I'm sure he was mad about it, but I was with two other guys.
This ain't over.
I actually did kind of feel good about that I had actually stood up for myself for once.
Andrew Rosser is not used to being humiliated and turns to his family to even the score.
We're not gonna let him get away with this. You should have seen his friends. Come on, Uncle Rob. If you come with us, we could scare the crap out of them.
Andrew, just let it go. It's gone too far now. Look, I don't want to see you guys get involved in anything stupid.
Uncle Rob, you always told us to stand up for ourselves.
Yeah.
Uncle Rob seems to be the only one trying to keep the peace.
My Uncle Rob, he was always there anytime I needed him. You know, he's always, he would protect us. But we had no time to listen.
The Rosser kids are out for revenge. But it will prove more than they bargained for.
We were washing our truck on the driveway.
Hey, Walter, can you hand me that cloth over there, please?
Hey, Walt, get over here.
Excuse me? Who the hell do you think you are?
Ain't nothing to do with you, old man.
The boys bucked up to him and challenged him.
How dare you come to my house?
Oh, shut up, Gramps. What are you gonna do? Hit us with your walking stick?
I wanted to get a rise out of him. Richard, we would always try to piss him off.
You know, maybe if you had a job, instead of your old lady doing all the work, you wouldn't be a tool like your son.
It was funny to us at the time, seeing a grumpy old man snap.
Yeah? Yeah. Your move removal,
Kick his ass, Mike.
His son was with him, and he had to prove something. That he was a man.
What did you do?
Yeah, right,
What did you
diabetes.
do?
Richard, what the hell are you doing?
You are a...
Richard!
Get off me. Somebody's got to teach these children a lesson.
What are you going to do? Are you going to beat them up in front of all the neighbors?
Richard Day was somebody that they could push his buttons and get the reaction they wanted. Unfortunately, they didn't know who they were dealing with.
This isn't over, you punk.
Get the hell out of here!
Whatever.
Things were definitely escalating.
He's got anger at these kids, and he's going to teach these kids a lesson.
That's it. Am I crazy? Oh my God.
Dad, look.
So let this be a reminder of you may not really want bad things to happen, but sometimes they can kind of spiral out of proportion.
The hostility between the Day and Rosser families is heating up. And Richard's patience is wearing thin.
What are you gonna do? Hit us with your walking stick?
Oh, they antagonized him, absolutely. It was definitely a bad situation. You have teenage kids
You move, old
Kick his
man.
ass, Mike.
who are acting like punks. You know, you're flipping off an adult.
What did you do?
Yeah, right,
What did you
diabetes.
do?
Richard, what the hell are you doing?
You are a...
Richard!
Get off me. Somebody's got to teach these children a lesson.
What are you going to
Adele manages to stop Richard from going too far. But he's not done with his antagonists yet.
This isn't over, you punk.
I think that because the young boys were flipping him off and saying things in front of his family and he couldn't do anything, made him feel less of a man.
If the Rosser adults can't control their children, maybe the police will.
That's not the point. These kids are terrorizing my son. You've got to do something about it.
But they haven't physically harmed him.
The cops basically told us that they could literally do anything they wanted on that road as long as they didn't step on your property.
They're on a public thoroughfare. He's on his private property. They're not hurling threats at him. They're just being disrespectful.
So that's it. There's not one thing you can do about it.
He felt hopeless because there's really nothing he could do to stop them.
He moved there to be in peace. And now there's these little hooligans living down the street, making his life miserable.
All these grievances were just mounting up, and it wasn't like they'd go away.
Finally, the feud reaches its boiling point.
It was on Halloween. You have children in little costumes going around getting candy. You got their parents with them. Weird stuff happens on Halloween, but I did not expect this.
I was at my buddy's house, and we eventually went home.
Richard, how much candy are you gonna eat?
I've barely had any.
You know how you get.
My mom was kind of concerned because when he didn't take his medicine, he had some flare-ups and mood changes when his sugar was up or down.
Tonight, Adele has good reason to worry.
Oh my God.
What is that?
The house was egged really bad and like doused with shaving cream on the driveway and the garage.
My mom was pretty appalled. My dad said a few cuss words. We had a pretty good idea of who did it.
They're dead.
Walter. Richard!
It upsets a homeowner, I understand that. But it's not permanent damage.
Listen to me. Walter!
Instead, this was, the only thing I can think of, this was the tipping point.
Walter!
I thought if the police aren't going to do anything about it, what are we going to do about it, you know? Are we going to let them continue to bully us? Or are we going to do something about it?
Walt, what has gotten into you?
I've had enough.
I basically told my dad that I would get the eggs and that we could go and egg their house back.
He's right, Adele. It's payback time. We have taken enough crap from these punks.
Oh, so what? You're gonna go egg their house? Real mature.
An eye for an eye.
Richard Day's wife, Adele, tried to stop him because of the condition he was in. She saw nothing good was going to happen.
Richard! Richard! Walter, stop!
He just snapped. He went into a rage.
Stop for a second. Richard!
And their sole purpose was to go find these kids.
Don't you dare get in that car! Walter, open the door! Walter, you open this door right now!
Way! He had the breaking point, then he went past it.
We peeled out of there and proceeded to the Rosser's house.
Tonight is payback. Are you ready to do this?
I'm ready!
You did the right thing. Listen, don't worry about your mother.
Richard Day decided he was going to dispense his own justice.
Halloween, you know, I'm sure conjures up all the evil and monsters under the bed. That night, you talk about evil. Evil walked that night.
Richard Day has had enough of the Rosser family.
That's enough.
Get back!
And tonight, he's been pushed too far.
He was thinking in his mind, the police aren't doing anything, parents aren't doing anything. This was it. Tonight, this was it.
And I heard the loud thuds. It was very loud. It almost sounded like little gunshots. I didn't know what to do. You know, I was 16 years old.
Dad! Uncle Rob, get down here now! Hey! 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 What the hell are you doing? Payback time!
He was acting like a lunatic. It looked like the devil was in him.
Let's go, Walter!
The situation is definitely going to get ugly, being that there's a lot more people there than us.
Get him down! Hey! 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 Get out of the truck! Hey!
If it's possible, his enrage point's even higher now.
Hey, out of the truck now!
He's facing the three individuals.
Richard!
Richard Day then made the decision.
Richard, get out of the car! All right? Hey! Richard! Richard, stop the truck!
I was terrified. I said to my stepdad, I think that we may have hit something.
Uncle Rob wound up getting hit by the truck, and he went up and stuck in the wheel well. And Richard continued to floor it down the street.
Richard, stop!
Dragging him over down the road.
Stop the truck!
All of a sudden, the truck starts coming barreling down at us. And at that point, as he's starting to come at me, I noticed something. It was Robert Campbell. He was getting road rash. The body was shook loose right at our stepping stones that led down to the street.
He was still conscious briefly. He kept saying he was gonna die.
Come on, Robert, it's all right. You're gonna be fine. Gently.
Robert Campbell was dragged underneath the truck anywhere from 100 to 190 feet. At a high rate of speed, with the pressure of the truck pushing down, getting scraped by this asphalt.
We need an ambulance right away.
Somebody was just hit by a car right in front of our house, and it looked like he was ran down on purpose.
And is the car still there?
I don't know if it's still here, but it's somebody that lives in the neighborhood.
My father held him tight. I remember my father being covered in blood, as well as arms, his hands, and just trying to calm Robert down.
He's in a truck with two headlights that sit on top. He hit him. I think he's injured really badly.
My Uncle Robert had nothing to do with this. He was completely innocent.
On that Halloween night, 2 families were destroyed.
Basically bled to death. The blood was pouring out of him.
Robert.
They took Richard Day in custody at his residence. Now, this is a homicide. Instead of a gun or a knife or a hatchet, it's a truck. That's the murder weapon.
I saw him, he was in handcuffs and they were putting him in the cop car. As a 12-year-old kid, I was devastated. You know, my dad was the world to me.
We're trying to figure out some reason for this, some logic, and there doesn't seem to be any.
News of the horrific event shocks the entire community.
A childish teenage prank.
At trial, Richard is found guilty of second-degree murder and is sentenced to life behind bars.
Richard Day did not have a gun.
For a second. Richard!
Instead, he had a 2,800-pound missile that he guided right for Robert Campbell. Now, Robert Campbell had no chance. None at all.
Everyone on both sides is left to struggle with the tragic aftermath.
The list of victims in this case start with Robert Campbell. Richard Day, yeah, he's the perpetrator of this murder, but his wife's a victim, his son's a victim.
It took a real big toll on my mother's mental health. She became very, very, very depressed. And she loved my dad. I loved my dad. I was in depression as well.
The Rosser families are victims. The whole neighborhood's a victim.
Adele and Walter move out of the neighborhood. Richard later dies in prison from complications of diabetes.
I wish that I could erase those thoughts and those images, those memories. The screaming, the blood, all that. It still messes with me now, from time to time.
Richard, stop the truck!
For years, I've had nightmares, and it makes me feel terrible that this happened.
It'll always be there, digging deep. I try to block it out of the earth. Right when I think everything's good, it pops back. Those are horrific. I always feel like my uncle's watching down on me.
I do blame myself a lot. I hope that after
Night settled over St. Catherine's like an unwelcome visitor, slow, suffocating, and full of quiet that shouldn't have existed. In the early hours, when the world still clung to dreamscapes and restless bedsheets, something dark stalked the edges of ordinary life. It was the kind of night where shadows seemed too deep, where the absence of sound carried its own dread, the kind of night that, in hindsight, would be remembered as the moment before everything changed forever. The rain had begun not with a storm, but with a whisper, a gentle hiss against the pavement, a soft tapping on window panes that promised nothing more than a wet morning commute. But as the hours crept toward dawn, that whisper grew into a persistent rhythm, drumming on rooftops like nervous fingers tapping out a warning. Streetlights reflected off slick asphalt, shimmering in halos of yellow that seemed too warm for the chill in the air. It was the kind of night that felt like a lullaby and a threat simultaneously, lulling the unwary into false comfort. Somewhere in the quiet, a clock ticked over to 3:14 a.m., though no one alive would remember it at the time. To the neighbors on that quiet crescent of suburban homes, nothing seemed out of place, no shattered glass, no raised voices, no sirens screaming through the calm. Just rain, just shadows, just the dark breathing against the stillness. And yet, deep inside an unremarkable house on an unremarkable street, something macabre unfurled. Once upon a time, the voice would later begin in the kind of opening that seemed surreal when juxtaposed with what followed. There were two people who appeared normal, but this was not a fairy tale. It was far from it. Nothing about the events that would grip Canada for years began with bombast or flashy headlines. There were no warnings. No cinematic prelude of approaching danger. Just the ordinary world, teenagers dreaming of future graduations, parents making lunches in the quiet morning, families swaying in half-remembered sleep, and, in the midst of it all, two people whose outward normality masked a chilling capacity for cruelty. When you hear the names Paul Kenneth Bernardo and Carla Homolka today, they might evoke the distant echo of news reports, of late-night discussions about justice and culpability, or perhaps the uncomfortable discomfort of knowing that evil often wears a face that looks, at first glance, indistinguishable from your neighbors. But in the early 1990s, those names were not yet etched into the national consciousness. They were just people among millions, walking streets, buying groceries, fitting into the cadence of everyday life. The hook, the crack in the veneer, the unraveling of normalcy, it all began not with a violent crescendo, but with subtle, chilling dissonance. Close your eyes and picture a quiet Canadian evening in the late 1980s. Picture street lamps glowing against an early winter chill. Picture the mundane rhythm of life carrying on, lights flickering on in homes as families settle for dinner, cars making their way home with predictable regularity, the low hum of tires against pavement like a lull in the world's pulse. No one imagined that somewhere in that rhythm, a pattern of darkness was quietly taking shape. If there was one thing that made this story different from the countless tales of crime that flicker in and out of public consciousness, it was this: it didn't start with a dramatic moment of rage or a random flash of violence. It started with familiarity. With a voice that could laugh and make jokes. With appearances that fit comfortably into neighborhoods like countless others. With a relationship that began without suspicion, without alarm. But beneath that ordinary surface, something was festering. And that is where our story begins, not with gore or spectacle, but with a question: how could this happen? How could two seemingly ordinary people, living unremarkable lives in quiet Canadian towns, become central figures in crimes so shocking that they would leave an indelible scar on the nation's psyche? The answer, as all true crime storytellers know, cannot be found in a single moment or a simple explanation. It is woven from threads of psychology and circumstance, of choices made in darkness and the blind spots of those around them. And like any tapestry of horror, it begins with a flicker, a small, almost imperceptible disturbance amidst the canvas of everyday life. On a cold night years before the world would whisper their names with a mixture of revulsion and morbid fascination, Paul walked through a quiet street. His footsteps were unremarkable, the crunch of gravel beneath his shoes just another sound among many. He did not run. He did not shout. He just walked the way any ordinary man might, wrapped in his coat against the chill, heading toward a destination that only he knew. It was not the footsteps that were chilling. It was the silence around them. And then, in another part of Ontario, Carla sat in her bedroom, laughing about something inconsequential. A joke shared with a friend. A story told with innocent animation. Her face, lit by the soft glow of a bedside lamp, gave nothing away, no premonition, no shadow of what was to come. These are the images we cling to at the beginning of true crime narratives: faces, ordinary and unsuspecting. Because true horror does not announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, often under the guise of the believable, the familiar. The first chapter of this story, the opening act of a real-life tragedy, is the unsettling contrast between what we see and what actually lurks beneath. It's the uneasy feeling when something doesn't quite add up, like a note that resonates just slightly flat in a melody you thought you knew. And as you listen to this tale unfold, it is the tension between familiarity and dread, between normalcy and the unfathomable, that will keep you anchored. Because this story is not simply about what happened. It's about why it happened, and what it reveals about the fragile veneer that separates safety from horror. In the stillness of those early mornings, when the rain tapped against windows and the world was half asleep, there were no clues, no screams, no sirens. Just life humming forward, unaware of the storms gathering on the horizon. This is where we begin, not with the brutality of what would come, but with the quiet before it, the ordinary before the unimaginable. Because to truly understand the depth of what happened, you must first step into the world as it was before the world knew their names. And so, dear listener, take a breath, steady your thoughts, and prepare to follow a story that defies comfort, that challenges understanding, and that forever altered the landscape of Canadian true crime. In the next chapter, we will step into the setting itself, the neighborhoods, the towns, and the everyday lives that made up the backdrop of an unfolding nightmare. The Ontario of the late 1980s and early 1990s was a landscape of quiet contrasts. Toronto hummed with urban energy, its skyscrapers reaching for a sky often veiled in grey clouds or brushed with the orange light of sunset. Streets were crowded yet orderly, filled with the everyday rhythms of commuters, students, and shopkeepers who moved in predictable patterns, oblivious to the darkness that was slowly threading itself into the edges of their lives. Scarborough, a suburb on the city's eastern edge, had a more intimate pace, streets lined with modest houses, well-kept lawns, and the faint scent of mulch and earth drifting from gardens. In St. Catharines, further west near the Niagara region, the atmosphere was quieter, gentler, and perhaps deceptively serene. Here, families settled into the predictability of school schedules, shopping trips, and neighborhood routines, unaware that some of the very people they trusted in their communities would soon challenge their notions of safety and normalcy. Walking through the neighborhoods where the future victims lived, one might have seen little that distinguished them from countless others across Canada. Houses with faded brick facades, porches decorated with flowering plants in the spring, bicycles leaning against fences, and the soft chatter of children playing after school created an image of ordinary suburban life. Yet beneath that calm surface, human nature and desire, ambition and obsession, were quietly colliding, creating a tension that would only reveal itself in hindsight. The streets themselves were mute witnesses, absorbing the small disturbances and hidden movements that would eventually culminate in horror. Schools were central to these communities, hubs of teenage energy and naivety. Students traversed hallways decorated with banners, lockers clanging, and the faint smell of cafeteria food hanging in the air. In classrooms, teachers called attendance, and teenagers laughed at jokes, exchanged notes, and navigated the delicate hierarchies of friendship and attraction. To an outsider, there was nothing suspicious about these young lives. Yet it was here that the shadows of manipulation and control began to creep in small ways that were imperceptible until they were too late. The same corridors that echoed with laughter also carried whispers, sly comments, and introductions that would later seem sinister, though at the time they were merely ordinary social interactions. The world Paul Bernardo inhabited was one of outward normality that concealed something far more disturbing. By day, he could blend into Toronto's urban streets, buy groceries at the corner store, chat with neighbors, and smile politely at acquaintances. At home, his demeanor suggested nothing of the meticulous planning and compulsive patterns that marked his private obsessions. Scarborough, with its mix of quiet residential streets and busier commercial areas, offered him a stage for behaviors that went unnoticed or were easily dismissed. Shops and parks were filled with families, joggers, and children, unaware that someone with a predatory eye walked among them, calculating, observing, and learning how to exploit trust. Carla Homolka, in contrast, moved in a different rhythm. At 17, she navigated high school halls with the lightness of youth but also with the complex consciousness of someone who sensed opportunity, influence, and control. Her home was typical, a suburban house filled with the routines of family life, meals prepared, beds made, chores assigned, and holidays celebrated. It was in this ordinary setting that she met Paul, and it was here that the first seeds of collaboration were planted. Their relationship, though initially unremarkable to outsiders, would become the conduit through which tragedy entered the lives of those around them. The juxtaposition of her youthful innocence with her eventual complicity would later horrify those who tried to understand how appearances could be so deceiving. The Ontario streets themselves were characters in this story, indifferent yet integral. Sidewalks bore the impressions of countless feet, some of them unaware, some of them deliberate. Streetlights illuminated patches of pavement with pools of golden light, leaving other areas in darkness where shadows could gather and linger. Rain occasionally slicked the asphalt, creating reflective surfaces that doubled the world in wet mirages. The seasons shifted with the same quiet inevitability they always had, crisp autumns with leaves turning gold and red, snow-laden winters that muffled sound and slowed movement, springs that brought a burst of life and chatter, and summers that spilled long evenings into warm nights. Each season carried the same ordinary beauty that masked the extraordinary horror unfolding in its midst. Communities were tightly knit, neighbors nodding at one another in passing, sharing small talk over fences, offering help with childcare or errands, trusting that the world conformed to a shared understanding of safety and decency. It was a trust that would be shattered. The local parks where children played, the streets where teenagers biked after school, The bus routes that carried them home all became unknowingly intertwined with the invisible patterns of predation that Paul Bernardo had quietly honed. Each mundane location, ordinary and familiar, became a backdrop to decisions that would devastate lives, turning spaces of comfort into memories forever tinged with fear. Even within the houses themselves, the settings carried significance. The way sunlight slanted across a living room in the afternoon, the slight creak of floorboards in hallways, the hum of refrigerators and heaters, all the ordinary sounds and sights of home created a contrast against the impending tragedy. Rooms that should have represented safety and warmth would become stages of horror, their normality amplifying the unnatural events that unfolded within. Everyday objects, a glass of juice, a folded towel, a bedroom door left ajar, became instruments and witnesses of acts that defied understanding. The intimacy of domestic life, normally a shield, was subverted into a trap, demonstrating how vulnerability often exists precisely where trust is highest. And then there were the small human rhythms that nobody noticed, the hesitation in a teenager's step as she walked past a neighbor, the casual glance exchanged with a new acquaintance, the fleeting smile of recognition between young people. These ephemeral moments, so easily overlooked, were threads in a tapestry that, in retrospect, showed patterns of grooming, influence, and manipulation. By combining subtle psychological control with the appearance of normalcy, Bernardo and Homolka operated in a world where their actions could be concealed beneath layers of familiarity and routine. In a place as ordinary as Ontario's suburbs, the extraordinary evil they would perpetrate could incubate quietly, invisible to all but those immediately ensnared. Even the mundane law enforcement presence, the local police stations, the routine patrols, the occasional traffic stops, provided no premonition of what was coming. Officers conducted their duties with the same attentiveness or occasional lapses typical of human systems, unaware that the trajectory of 3 young lives would soon demand an extraordinary level of investigation. Community trust, parental vigilance, school supervision, all these mechanisms of protection existed in theory but would be tested and found tragically insufficient against a combination of cunning, manipulation, and planning. It is within this ordinary, almost idyllic setting that the horror of the Bernardo Homolka saga began to take shape. Neighborhoods, schools, parks, streets, and homes, places that should have felt safe, became unknowingly enmeshed in a narrative that blurred the boundaries between ordinary life and incomprehensible cruelty. The setting itself, in all its quiet suburban normality, created the perfect backdrop for a story that would shock a nation, force communities to question the very nature of trust, and leave lasting impressions on the Canadian collective consciousness. Understanding this backdrop is essential, because the ordinary nature of these towns, these streets, these homes, is what allowed the extraordinary events to unfold. Without familiarity, without routine, without the deceptive calm of everyday life, the tragedy could never have been as psychologically disturbing. It is the collision of the mundane and the horrific, of trust and betrayal, that makes this story both compelling and horrifying. The setting is not just where the events occurred, it is the silent accomplice that framed every action, every decision, every moment that would eventually lead to lives being irrevocably altered. And so, the stage was set, the streets of Toronto, Scarborough, and St. Catharines, bathed in the subtle light of ordinary days, lined with ordinary houses, echoing with ordinary laughter, carrying the quiet footsteps of ordinary citizens. It was here, in this deceptive calm, that 2 people would begin to unravel the lives of the innocent, and where the ordinary would become the canvas for acts that would forever haunt the nation's memory. The setting, with all its deceptive tranquility, was complete. The story was ready to move forward, and the world was about to be forced to look behind the curtain and confront the darkness lurking in plain sight. Tammy Homolka was 15, the kind of age that hovers on the edge of childhood and adulthood, when the world seems both impossibly large and intimately familiar. Her days were measured by the cadence of school bells, the hum of fluorescent lights in classrooms, the soft chatter of friends swapping secrets and gossip. Her laughter was easy, unself-conscious, and in its lightness carried the faint echoes of innocence, the fleeting trust that all children hold before the shadows of the world press too close. At home, she moved with the rhythm of someone who belonged, who was woven into the fabric of family life with quiet ease. Bedrooms smelled faintly of shampoo and laundry, hallways carried the hum of televisions left on in the background, and the kitchen was filled with the comforting, mundane sounds of family routines, the clatter of dishes, the low murmur of conversation, the scent of dinner simmering on the stove. Tammy existed comfortably within this ordinary space, a bright thread in a tapestry that, to all appearances, was complete and safe. Her relationship with her older sister, Carla, was typical in some ways, marked by teasing, occasional friction, and the unspoken bonds of shared experience. They navigated siblinghood with a mixture of rivalry and care, learning the delicate negotiation of closeness and independence. Yet, like many familial relationships, it contained layers invisible to outsiders, moments of unvoiced longing, subtle manipulations, and the complex emotional currents that define how we interact with those closest to us. In Tammy's world, Carla was not yet a harbinger of danger, but merely a sister, someone whose opinions and moods could shape her days in small but meaningful ways. Tammy trusted her sister, as children so often do, without suspicion or reservation, believing in the inherent goodwill of those she loved most. Outside the walls of home, Tammy's life was vibrant in ways that reflected her youth. She navigated the halls of her school with the tentative confidence of a teenager discovering her place in the social landscape. Classrooms offered both challenge and refuge, a mathematics problem solved correctly, a compliment on an essay, the quiet satisfaction of mastering a new skill. Hallways pulsed with the energy of students laughing and joking, backpacks slung carelessly, notebooks flipping open with the snap of spirals. In these moments, Tammy was unremarkable, yet entirely herself, thoughtful, curious, and unaware of the dangers that loomed beyond the periphery of her adolescent world. Her friendships were grounded in shared experiences and innocent confidences. Conversations about crushes, fashion, music, and school projects filled afternoons with warmth and lightness. These were the ordinary joys of youth, the building blocks of identity, the scaffolding upon which children begin to understand themselves and the world around them. Tammy moved through these interactions with a natural charm, a gentle openness that invited trust and connection. She was not naive in the sense of being oblivious, but her faith in human decency, particularly within the sanctuary of family, created a vulnerability that would tragically be exploited. There were small quirks that made Tammy who she was, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating, the careful way she organized her school notes, the soft smile that would appear unbidden when recalling a joke from a friend. She loved simple pleasures, the warmth of the sun on her face during spring mornings, the scent of freshly cut grass drifting through the neighborhood, the comfort of a favorite sweater on cold evenings. Her personality was luminous not because it sought attention, but because it radiated genuine kindness and curiosity. Those who knew her often remembered the subtle ways she brightened rooms, the way her presence could soften tensions, the way she approached the world with both care and eagerness to explore. Tammy also carried within her the ordinary complexities of a teenager's mind, moments of doubt, fleeting insecurities, dreams of the future that seemed both tantalizingly close and impossibly distant. She imagined herself growing up, pursuing ambitions, perhaps leaving the familiar streets of Scarborough for broader horizons, and in those moments she held hope as naturally as breathing. Her diary entries, small and private, reflected these thoughts, sketches of plans for summer adventures, musings about school, fleeting romantic interests, and reflections on friendships that she cherished. The diary was a repository not just of ordinary teenage thought, but of a mind beginning to form patterns of self-awareness, understanding of relationships, and awareness of the world's possibilities. And yet, there was also a naivety intrinsic to her age, a blind spot in which trust flourished unchecked. She believed in the inherent safety of family spaces, in the protective boundaries of home, in the idea that those closest to her would act as guardians, not threats. This natural faith, so common and necessary in adolescence, became tragically significant. It allowed subtle manipulations to go unnoticed, allowed influence to seep in where caution might have otherwise prevailed. Tammy's trust was a quiet, powerful testament to her character, one that in ordinary circumstances would have been unremarkable, but in the context of what would unfold, it marked her as extraordinarily vulnerable. The ordinary world that Tammy inhabited, her school, her home, her neighborhood streets, was filled with routine sensory cues that would later be laden with significance. The creak of a floorboard in the hallway, the faint hum of traffic outside her window, the smell of toast in the morning, the way the light shifted in her bedroom at different times of day, all of these minutiae were invisible markers of normalcy. They provided context, a comforting frame, for her daily life. Within these ordinary markers, there was a rhythm and predictability that gave her a sense of safety, and it was precisely this sense that allowed the extraordinary events to unfold without immediate detection. Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, the other young lives entwined with this story, existed in similar worlds, each defined by the ordinariness of youth and the subtle richness of their personalities. Leslie was 14, small and thoughtful, with a penchant for drawing and a shy laugh that surfaced when she felt at ease. Her days were filled with the same rhythms as Tammy's: school, friendships, family interactions, and private moments of imagination. Kristen was 15, poised and observant, carrying herself with a quiet determination and a curiosity that made her both independent and socially attuned. Each of these girls navigated ordinary landscapes with the ordinary mixture of confidence and uncertainty inherent to adolescence. Each possessed small habits, preferences, and expressions that made them uniquely themselves: a favorite book, a preferred route home, a joke shared with a friend that made them momentarily luminous against the backdrop of ordinary days. The tragedy of these young lives lies not in the extraordinary acts they accomplished, for they had accomplished none, but in their extraordinary ordinariness. It was precisely the normalcy of their lives that made the intrusion of violence so jarring. Their homes, hallways, schools, and neighborhoods were sanctuaries designed to protect, to nurture, to allow youth to unfold naturally. The juxtaposition of such everyday worlds with the unfathomable cruelty that would invade them magnifies the horror. When we recount their stories, the goal is not simply to enumerate events, but to restore their presence, to paint them vividly as they were, living, breathing, thinking, laughing, worrying, and dreaming. It is critical to remember the girls not as symbols or statistics, but as full human beings, each with depth, texture, and color in their personalities. Tammy's favorite sweater, the curl of hair that fell across her forehead, the small details of her routines, the way she spoke to friends and family, these are not trivial. They are the evidence of a life lived, however tragically cut short. Leslie's sketches, Kristen's observant gaze, their shared laughter and solitary moments all form the mosaic of individuality that makes the loss palpable. They are not merely victims in a case file, they are lives that existed in a world of ordinary beauty and possibility, which makes the violation of that world all the more wrenching. As we move forward into the story, understanding who these girls were in their full complexity is essential. It is tempting to focus solely on the perpetrators, the sensational elements, the public horror, but the true weight of the narrative lies in the vibrancy of the lives they interrupted. By reconstructing their days, their thoughts, their small choices, and their interactions with the world around them, we see the contrast between life as it was lived and life as it was taken. Their stories remind us that evil does not occur in isolation, it intrudes upon the ordinary, exploits trust, and preys upon the human propensity for faith in others. In reflecting on Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen, one cannot help but imagine the small moments now lost to history: Tammy glancing at her reflection in a bedroom mirror, unaware of the shadow that would enter her life, Leslie lingering over a sketch she had drawn in pencil. Her brow furrowed in concentration, Kristen adjusting the strap of her backpack, anticipating an afternoon with friends. These are the intimate, unremarkable acts that define existence and give texture to human life. They are the moments that make the subsequent intrusion of violence not just a story of crime, but a profound rupture in the natural order of growth, trust, and potential. The victims' worlds were full of light and shadow, curiosity and caution, laughter and trepidation. By honoring these details, we confront the reality that the narrative is not just about horror inflicted, but about life interrupted. Their stories are the anchor of empathy in a tale that could otherwise be reduced to sensationalism. To understand what follows, we must first inhabit their days, their thoughts, their rhythms, and their humanity. Only then can the subsequent events be fully comprehended not as abstract terror, but as real-life tragedy that touched individuals, families, and communities in ways that resonate far beyond the moment of loss. The night that changed everything did not arrive with an announcement or a fanfare. It slipped in quietly, as nights do, carrying with it a deceptive calm that belied the violence to come. For Tammy Homoka, Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French, it began as any other evening might have: small routines, familiar patterns, the comforting hum of ordinary life. Yet within these routines, subtle threads were pulling them toward danger. It was a night when trust, routine, and innocence would collide with calculated malice, producing consequences that could not be undone. Tammy's last evening began like many others. The kitchen smelled faintly of dinner left warm on the stove, the chatter of family filling the corners of the room. She laughed at a comment her sister made, her attention caught momentarily by something trivial, a minor joke or anecdote, entirely unaware that the laughter she shared would soon become part of a narrative tinged with tragedy. Her movements were unhurried, casual, the ordinary gestures of a young girl in a world she believed was secure. The ordinary is what allowed the extraordinary to unfold unnoticed. No alarm, no sense of danger, only the deceptive safety of home and family. Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French's final days carried similar rhythms, although each had their own small variations: homework completed with concentration, brief social interactions with friends, shared secrets whispered in the hallways of schools, and the small, joyful rituals of adolescence. Their routines were ordinary in every way, a fact that would later be emphasized in police reports, media narratives, and public recollections. To those who knew them, there was nothing extraordinary in their patterns: the quiet predictability of adolescence, the minor anxieties and pleasures of growing up. Yet it was precisely this predictability that left them exposed, that made their movements legible to those who would exploit them. It was on these ordinary evenings that Paul Bernardo's calculated attentions intersected with lives that, until that point, had been safe. He observed, he waited, and he chose moments that appeared inconsequential to the outside world, but were decisive in the narrative of what was to come. His actions were deliberate, the result of meticulous planning, patience, and a perverse understanding of opportunity. Every encounter, every approach, every suggestion that drew the girls into his orbit was crafted to minimize suspicion and maximize compliance. He operated with the precision of someone who had rehearsed these interactions repeatedly in his mind, anticipating reactions and adjusting his strategy accordingly. Carla Homoka, too, played a role that was both ordinary and insidious. In the quiet of suburban homes, in the laughter of shared jokes, in the mundane gestures of sisterhood and companionship, she created a facade of normality. To those around her, she was a typical teenager, navigating high school corridors, exchanging confidences with friends, moving through life with the ease and charm that characterized youth. Yet beneath this facade lay a willingness to participate in acts that would ultimately shatter the lives of those closest to her. Her complicity was subtle in its initiation, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew into a central part of the unfolding tragedy. The incidents themselves unfolded with a rhythm that was chilling in its ordinariness. Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen were drawn into circumstances that appeared familiar, safe, or at least mundane. Invitations to socialize, small errands, casual suggestions, these seemingly insignificant moments were the opening acts of a much darker sequence. The ordinary context concealed the extraordinary danger, allowing manipulation and coercion to occur without immediate detection. The girls' trust, their faith in routine, and their untested assumptions about safety in familiar spaces became the mechanisms by which control was exerted. The first moment when the world tipped toward horror was subtle, almost imperceptible. It did not arrive with violence, but with the quiet imposition of authority and persuasion. The girls found themselves in situations where leaving was possible but psychologically constrained by factors they did not fully understand: promises of fun or companionship, subtle threats implied rather than stated, and the insidious exploitation of trust. The human mind, especially the adolescent mind, often interprets these situations through a lens of hope, curiosity, or naive confidence, making it all the more tragic when those interpretations are manipulated. Once the girls were within the orchestrated environment, the incidents escalated according to patterns that had been rehearsed and refined. Bernardo's planning ensured that each step appeared ordinary even as it eroded their autonomy. Spaces that had once been neutral or comforting, a living room, a kitchen, a bedroom, became controlled zones in which his influence dictated the flow of events. Objects as innocuous as a chair, a blanket, or a lamp were repurposed within the context of his control, transforming the familiar into instruments of tension. The interplay between familiar domesticity and imposed fear magnified the psychological dissonance experienced by the victims. Carla's participation, in turn, reinforced the sense of inevitability that the victims would feel. By presenting herself as supportive, acquiescent, or even comforting, she maintained a semblance of normalcy while actively facilitating Bernardo's objectives. The ordinary gestures, offering a drink, asking a benign question, moving around the room, were subtle manipulations that further limited the girl's ability to resist. Their responses, natural and human, were interpreted by the perpetrators not as obstacles but as data points, confirming that the control they exerted was effective. Throughout the incidents, the ordinary world continued around them. Neighbors went about evening routines, streetlights flickered in the quiet neighborhoods, cars passed slowly along wet pavement, and the faint hum of distant traffic underscored the seeming serenity of suburban life. This juxtaposition, the violence contained within ordinary spaces, amplified the horror in retrospect. It was a horror that was both immediate and deeply intimate, occurring in places where safety should have been absolute. The tension between the visible calm of the environment and the invisible cruelty unfolding inside homes created a psychological weight that would haunt investigators, families, and communities alike. The girls' attempts at normal responses, small gestures of defiance, subtle protests, or even mere attempts to comprehend their circumstances, were met with calculated adjustments. Bernardo's ability to anticipate human behavior and Carla's facilitation meant that each response was absorbed, neutralized, or redirected. The ordinary rhythms of human thought and action were exploited, transformed into predictable patterns that fed the perpetrator's control. These dynamics reveal the chilling precision with which the incidents unfolded, not chaotic eruptions of violence, but carefully managed sequences designed to manipulate, isolate, and dominate. For Tammy, the escalation was sudden yet cloaked in plausible deniability, leading to confusion, fear, and ultimately tragedy. For Leslie and Kristen, the pattern was repeated with variations designed to maximize control while minimizing risk of detection. Each incident carried the duality of ordinariness and terror, where seemingly mundane choices and interactions became the framework for profound violation. It was a horror born not from spectacle, but from the insidious subversion of everyday life, the transformation of familiar routines into mechanisms of control, the exploitation of trust in a way that left no obvious trail until the outcomes were irreversible. In retrospect, it is striking how ordinary the incidents appeared to anyone outside the immediate circle. Nothing about the initial approach of the perpetrators suggested catastrophe. There were no obvious alarms, no immediate screams for help, no overt threats in the first moments. The subtlety of the manipulation, the ordinariness of the context, and the trust inherent in adolescent perception combined to create a perfect storm of vulnerability. What seemed mundane was, in reality, the prelude to irreversible harm. The psychological texture of these incidents is what lingers most when analyzing them. Each victim was placed in a position of constrained agency, forced to navigate a scenario where conventional strategies for seeking help or escaping were rendered ineffective not by physical impossibility alone, but by the careful orchestration of perception, expectation, and subtle coercion. The mind of the adolescent, already navigating a labyrinth of social and emotional complexities, was uniquely susceptible to this form of manipulation. The incidents exploited not only physical vulnerability, but cognitive and emotional pathways that shape human trust, obedience, and compliance. By the conclusion of these orchestrated incidents, the ordinary had been transformed irrevocably into the site of horror. Rooms that had once been ordinary, familiar, and comforting had become theaters of psychological domination. The girls' understanding of their world, what was safe, what could be trusted, what was familiar, had been shattered. Yet to the outside observer, the streets remained quiet, the neighborhood calm, the suburban veneer intact. It was this dissonance, the juxtaposition of internal terror with external normalcy, that underscores the complexity and horror of what occurred. The incidents themselves were more than physical or situational events, they were processes of transformation, marking the shift from ordinary adolescence to a confrontation with evil that could not have been anticipated. The psychological imprint of these experiences, on the victims, their families, and the community, would last long after the events themselves. The subtle, orchestrated erosion of control, the manipulation of trust, and the violation of expectation created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate incidents, shaping investigations, media narratives, and national consciousness for years to come. In tracing the contours of these incidents, one sees the terrifying interplay between ordinariness and premeditation. The victims' routines, spaces, and trust were not coincidental. They were selected, observed, and exploited. What was ordinary became extraordinary, what was mundane became perilous, and what was familiar became a cage. Understanding the incidents in this way, as carefully orchestrated disruptions of ordinary life, is crucial to comprehending the psychological and social impact of these crimes. They were not spontaneous eruptions of violence, but the culmination of planning, observation, and the deliberate manipulation of trust, making the horror both more calculated and more unsettling. The incidents marked the point at which innocence collided with malevolence in a way that could no longer be contained. Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen were ordinary girls whose lives, filled with the simple pleasures, routines, and dreams of youth, were violently redirected. Their experiences illuminate not only the depth of human cruelty but also the fragility of trust, the deceptive safety of ordinary spaces, and the vulnerability inherent in ordinary life. By understanding the intricacies of these incidents, we can better grasp the gravity of the crimes, the meticulousness of the perpetrators, and the profound tragedy of lives interrupted before their potential could fully unfold. The discovery was never sudden, it crept forward, like the first grey light of dawn revealing truths that had been hidden in darkness. At first, there were only whispers, hints that something was amiss, minor inconsistencies that could be dismissed with the inertia of everyday life. Friends noticed missed appointments, families sensed an unusual quiet, and neighbors remarked on things that did not fit their usual patterns. In Scarborough, St. Catharines, and the broader communities of Ontario, the ordinary rhythm of days continued, oblivious to the threads of dread beginning to unravel beneath the surface. But the shadows were growing longer, and the ordinary safeguards of home, school, and friendship could no longer contain what was emerging. For Tammy Homoka, the first signs of danger were tragically imperceptible. Her family initially interpreted her illness and the events surrounding her final evening as a cruel accident, a miscalculation of health and circumstance. The home itself, once a sanctuary, became a place of confusion and sorrow as the adults tried to piece together the inexplicable. The ordinary sounds of family life, the hum of appliances, the rustle of curtains in the breeze, the distant laughter of neighbors stood in stark contrast to the grief settling heavily over the house. The subtle details of the scene, overlooked at the time, would later acquire a chilling significance: the small stains on the carpet, the misplaced objects in her bedroom, the faint smell that lingered where it should not have, all ordinary in themselves. But now markers of an event that defied understanding. The discovery of Leslie Mahaffey's disappearance followed a pattern both similar and horrifyingly distinct. Parents noticed her absence from school, her room remained untouched, her personal items left as if frozen in mid-routine. At first, explanations were mundane: she had stayed with a friend, had lost track of time, or had chosen to wander further than usual. But as hours stretched into days, the ordinary assumptions could no longer hold. The unease intensified in the household. Each tick of the clock, each unanswered phone call, each passing shadow became a vector for anxiety. The routine that had once been comforting was now fractured, exposing the family to a growing sense of powerlessness. Leslie's disappearance was a rupture in time itself, a break in the predictable cadence of life that rendered every subsequent ordinary detail suspicious, every small sound potentially portentous. Kristen French's absence followed in a similar arc, but with a heightened urgency that reflected the accumulated experience of previous disappearances. Parents, neighbors, and schools had already felt the tremor of unease. Now the tremor became a quake. Teachers recalled seeing her in the halls, friends remembered her last smiles, siblings replayed conversations, searching for a clue in words that had once been fleetingly mundane. The ordinary spaces of her life, her classroom, the walk home from school, the parks where she laughed and played, were reframed in collective memory as places that had borne silent witness to the intrusion of violence. The ordinary had been violated, and discovery was not merely about locating a missing child, it was about confronting the shattering of safety, the erosion of trust, and the introduction of chaos into the predictable narrative of adolescence. The first tangible evidence that something had gone terribly wrong came in the form of physical anomalies: a room disheveled in a way that defied explanation, objects out of place, personal items left where they should not have been, and small signs that hinted at struggle. Police responding to the initial reports approached these markers cautiously, aware that missing persons cases could vary widely in cause and outcome. Each observation, each seemingly mundane detail, was catalogued, photographed, and preserved. Yet the ordinary nature of many of these clues complicated early interpretations. A misplaced book, a slightly ajar door, a note left unfinished, these were small anomalies that, on their own, would not suggest malevolence, but together began to form a pattern that hinted at something darker than anyone initially imagined. Investigators relied on the meticulous cataloguing of these small inconsistencies to reconstruct the final moments of the victims' lives. Each anomaly became a data point in a broader map of human behavior intersecting with premeditated manipulation. A chair overturned slightly, a window left open, a faint trace of residue on a counter, all mundane observations were recontextualized under the lens of emerging suspicion. The process was painstaking. Investigators could not allow assumptions to cloud judgment, yet intuition whispered that the ordinary circumstances had been infiltrated by calculated malice. It was this tension between normalcy and emerging horror that characterized the discovery phase, demanding both patience and vigilance from those tasked with finding answers. The neighborhoods themselves seemed to respond to the unfolding crisis. Streets that had once been calm now felt heavy with apprehension. Parents began to watch their children more closely, neighbors lingered at fences and doorways, sharing concerns and observations. There was a collective, almost subconscious sense that the ordinary had shifted, that a boundary had been crossed which rendered previous assumptions of safety unreliable. The streets, sidewalks, and parks became surveilled spaces in a new way, the familiar transformed into a landscape of vigilance. The ordinary cadence of life, once comforting, became an instrument for tracking, analyzing, and anticipating potential danger, a stark contrast to the prelude when everyday movement was undisturbed and unremarkable. The investigative process intensified as the first leads emerged. Friends and acquaintances of the victims were interviewed, patterns in daily routines reconstructed, and timelines established with painstaking attention to detail. Every deviation from the expected sequence of events became critical. Questions arose: who had been the last to see them? What had they done in the hours leading to disappearance? What minor interactions could contain clues? These inquiries, seemingly simple, revealed the intricate weave of normal life intersecting with extraordinary predation. Each ordinary interaction, the casual ride to a friend's house, a walk along a familiar street, a shared conversation, was scrutinized under a lens that revealed vulnerability hidden in plain sight. Physical spaces where the girls had last been became focal points for the discovery process. Bedrooms, classrooms, hallways, and even front yards were treated as repositories of evidence, each object carefully noted, each detail meticulously recorded. Investigators had to distinguish between ordinary disorder, scattered clothing, misplaced schoolbooks, furniture shifted through use, and anomalies that suggested manipulation or struggle. The ordinary details of life became the canvas on which extraordinary crimes were traced, and understanding these minutiae was essential for constructing an accurate narrative. Even the passage of sunlight across a room, or the faint marks left on a floorboard from routine movement, could offer insight into the sequence of events, the presence of outsiders, or the timing of key actions. Community involvement played an unexpected role in the process of discovery. Neighborhoods began to mobilize, neighbors shared observations, parents joined patrols, and local organizations facilitated communication channels. These ordinary acts, born of concern and vigilance, became critical in forming a composite understanding of the victim's last known movements. While the investigation relied on police expertise, the collective attention of the community created a broader lens through which the ordinary could be transformed into extraordinary insight. In this way, discovery was not merely the product of professional observation, it emerged from the interaction between human attentiveness, ordinary curiosity, and the recognition that lives had been disrupted in ways that demanded collective response. Media scrutiny amplified the sense of discovery, adding layers of both clarity and distortion. Reports focused on timelines, family statements, and the emerging pattern of disappearances. Each new detail, however mundane in isolation, a found item, a reported sighting, a forgotten errand, was reframed as part of a larger narrative of concern. The ordinary was thus elevated to significance, and public awareness created an additional lens through which both investigators and citizens interpreted events. The tension between routine life and emergent horror became not only a psychological phenomenon but also a social one, shaping perception, behavior, and communal vigilance. The true magnitude of discovery crystallized as connections between incidents became undeniable. Tammy's death, once considered a tragic accident, was re-examined in the context of Leslie and Kristen's disappearances. Investigators began to perceive patterns of control, coercion, and premeditation. Ordinary spaces, the bedroom, the living room, the quiet suburban streets, were recognized not just as passive locations, but as stages on which the unfolding sequence of events had occurred. The recognition of this pattern transformed the understanding of the crimes from isolated tragedies to the work of methodical, coordinated acts. It was a chilling revelation. The ordinary, once a shield, had been weaponized against those who had trusted it most. Families, for their part, were caught in a maelstrom of grief, confusion, and dawning horror. They navigated a delicate balance between hope and despair, between disbelief and recognition of the evidence accumulating before them. The ordinary rhythms of meals, conversation, and household chores were now punctuated by police visits, interviews, and media inquiries. Every familiar gesture, the opening of a bedroom door, the rustle of a favorite blanket, the sound of footsteps in a hallway, was reframed through the lens of absence and suspicion. The domestic world, once a haven, became a space haunted by questions too complex to answer, by details too ordinary to be immediately understood as sinister. And so, discovery was not a single moment but a continuum, a slow peeling back of the layers of deception, a painstaking reconstruction of the intersection between ordinary life and extraordinary malevolence. Each observation, each interview, each overlooked detail contributed to the eventual recognition that something profoundly wrong had occurred. The ordinary and the horrific collided in ways that were inseparable, and understanding the scope of these events required not only meticulous attention to facts, but empathy, patience, and a recognition of the subtle ways in which human trust can be manipulated. In the end, the discovery was as much about comprehension as it was about evidence. Police, families, friends, and communities came to see not just the physical absence of the victims, but the unraveling of the ordinary fabric of life itself. Every ordinary routine interrupted, every familiar space transformed, every moment of adolescent normalcy violated became a testament to both the cruelty of the perpetrators and the fragility of safety when faced with calculated manipulation. The process of discovery was painstaking, often excruciating, but it was also essential, a bridge from confusion to understanding, from absence to recognition, from tragedy to the pursuit of justice. The investigation began with questions that had no easy answers. Detectives arrived at the scenes with the weight of responsibility pressing down on them, aware that every decision, every observation, every overlooked detail could mean the difference between justice and continued terror. From the moment Tammy Homoka's death was reclassified as suspicious to the disappearances of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, the police were thrust into a labyrinth of clues, lies, and the chilling precision of two perpetrators who had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide their tracks. The ordinary assumptions that had guided early responses were quickly abandoned in favor of meticulous scrutiny. Nothing could be left unexamined, every fragment of evidence potentially significant. Investigators began by reconstructing timelines with painstaking accuracy, cross-referencing school schedules, work logs, and social interactions. Every last detail was considered: who had last seen the victims, what they had said, and where they had gone afterward. The detectives' notebooks filled with names, addresses, and times, as they attempted to map the movements of not only the victims, but those in their orbit. Friends, neighbors, classmates, and extended family members were interviewed repeatedly, each account analyzed for discrepancies or patterns that might reveal the unseen hand orchestrating these crimes. Ordinary life became a web of potential insights. Casual comments in school hallways, fleeting observations on the street, and small deviations in routine were all elevated to evidence, their significance magnified by the context of the unfolding mystery. The investigative team faced immediate frustration. The perpetrators had planned carefully, leaving few traces and constructing a facade of normality. Paul Bernardo's outward persona was unremarkable, a veneer of charm and everyday civility that concealed his methodical and predatory instincts. Carla Homolka's youth and perceived innocence further complicated matters. Authorities initially struggled to reconcile her involvement with her seemingly ordinary behavior. Interviews with friends and family painted a picture of a typical suburban life, punctuated by the minor dramas and routines of adolescence, making it difficult to imagine how such violence could be occurring in their midst. This duality, the ordinary appearance of the suspects versus the extraordinary nature of the crimes, became one of the central challenges of the investigation. Forensic teams worked tirelessly to analyze the limited physical evidence available. Every surface in the victims' homes, every vehicle they had entered, every personal belonging was subjected to microscopic examination. Fibers, fingerprints, and chemical residues were catalogued and compared against databases and known patterns of criminal behavior. Even the smallest clue, a hair out of place, a faint smudge on a countertop, or the angle of a displaced object, was considered potentially pivotal. The investigators understood that in a case where the perpetrators had been methodical and deliberate, the margin for error was slim, and the importance of thoroughness could not be overstated. Psychological profiling became an essential tool. Experts attempted to reconstruct the mindset of the perpetrators, examining the selection of victims, the manipulation techniques used, and the escalation of violence across multiple incidents. Patterns emerged: the targeting of adolescent girls, the use of trust and familiarity to gain access, and the careful orchestration of events to minimize detection. Profilers hypothesized the dynamics between the two perpetrators, considering how one influenced the other and how complicity may have developed over time. The psychological landscape of the investigation added a layer of complexity, requiring detectives to anticipate not only physical behaviors but also the cognitive and emotional strategies employed by the suspects. Public pressure intensified the investigation. Media coverage had turned the disappearances into high-profile cases, with journalists scrutinizing every development. Families of the victims, distraught and desperate for answers, applied pressure on law enforcement to accelerate progress. The detectives were acutely aware of the need to balance speed with accuracy. Hasty conclusions could compromise evidence, while prolonged uncertainty increased public fear and left the families without closure. The investigation became a high-stakes exercise in precision and patience, requiring both scientific rigor and emotional resilience from all involved. The police explored multiple lines of inquiry simultaneously. Neighborhood canvassing, witness interviews, and background checks were conducted in parallel, creating a dense network of information that required constant organization and evaluation. Investigators revisited locations multiple times, observing changes in lighting, shadows, and spatial relationships that could provide insight into the perpetrator's planning. Each scene became a complex puzzle, with ordinary details, furniture placement, household objects, lighting, door positions analyzed for potential clues. The process was painstaking, requiring a meticulous attention to the mundane that, paradoxically, revealed the extraordinary sophistication of the crimes. Early suspicion fell on acquaintances and family members, as is common in cases involving young victims. Investigators were initially confronted with a maze of alibis, partial recollections, and inconsistent statements. Each lead required verification through independent sources, and false leads had to be carefully ruled out without alienating the community or jeopardizing ongoing investigation efforts. The team quickly learned that the ordinary patterns of suburban life, family gatherings, school activities, social visits, were fraught with both insight and complication. Differentiating between benign behaviors and subtle indications of guilt became a central challenge. It was through a combination of forensic diligence, pattern recognition, and psychological insight that investigators began to narrow their focus on Bernardo. His history as a known offender in Scarborough, involving a series of sexual assaults, provided a critical foundation. Authorities revisited his previous cases, re-examining patterns, victim profiles, and behavior that had been noted but perhaps underestimated in severity. Cross-referencing this history with the disappearances of Leslie and Kristen revealed a troubling alignment: the methodical targeting of adolescent girls, the use of control and isolation, and the calculated avoidance of immediate detection. This historical lens offered a glimpse into the continuity of predatory behavior, showing that the crimes were not isolated acts but part of a larger, evolving pattern. Carla's involvement, however, presented a perplexing dimension. Investigators had to consider whether she had been a coerced participant, a willing accomplice, or an instigator. Her proximity to the victims, particularly Tammy Homoka, complicated assessments of motive and intent. Interviews, behavioral observations, and analysis of relationships were essential in forming a coherent understanding of her role. Her ordinary appearance, a young woman attending school, socializing with friends, and maintaining familial connections, made it difficult for anyone outside the investigative team to reconcile her participation with her external persona. Yet every piece of evidence suggested her involvement was active, deliberate, and consequential. The collection of audiovisual material was another critical aspect of the investigation. Videotapes and photographs, initially obscure, were analyzed frame by frame. Experts examined gestures, expressions, room arrangements, and background details to establish timelines, victim behavior, and suspect participation. The disturbing clarity of these recordings provided both insight and horror, revealing patterns of control, coercion, and premeditation that words alone could not capture. The process was grueling. The investigators were forced to confront acts of cruelty while maintaining the analytical detachment necessary to use this evidence effectively in prosecution. As the investigation deepened, law enforcement worked to integrate community intelligence with formal evidence collection. Tips from neighbors, sightings reported by friends, and observations from teachers and classmates all became part of a larger mosaic of understanding. The ordinary actions of everyday citizens, recalling small interactions, noticing patterns in behavior, or remembering conversations that seemed trivial at the time, became pivotal. Each account was weighed, verified, and cross-referenced, highlighting how collective awareness and careful observation could bridge gaps left by physical evidence alone. Interagency collaboration also became critical. Police departments across Scarborough, St. Catharines, and Toronto coordinated to track movements, compile records, and analyze behavioral patterns. Communication between units allowed investigators to identify consistencies across jurisdictions, revealing the systematic nature of the crimes. The ordinary bureaucracy of police work reports, memoranda, and interdepartmental meetings was transformed into a precise mechanism for uncovering the extraordinary, turning procedural diligence into a tool of revelation. Investigators also faced the challenge of anticipating the suspect's next moves. Both Bernardo and Homoka had demonstrated an ability to manipulate, conceal, and evade detection, making predictive analysis essential. Profilers and detectives worked to reconstruct psychological motivations, likely behaviors, and potential vulnerabilities. Every ordinary decision made by the perpetrators, whether choosing a route through the city, interacting with acquaintances, or managing domestic life, was scrutinized as a possible window into their intent. The ordinary became a medium for insight, a canvas onto which patterns of manipulation and control were projected. As the investigation progressed, the pieces began to coalesce. Disparate anomalies, subtle inconsistencies, and minor clues formed a cohesive narrative of calculated, premeditated crime. Investigators could finally see the interlocking patterns, the selection of victims, the exploitation of trust, the use of ordinary environments as stages for extraordinary horror. The process of connecting the dots required both scientific rigor and imaginative reconstruction, demanding a delicate balance between empirical analysis and psychological insight. Each breakthrough, no matter how small, reinforced the sense of urgency and the weight of responsibility borne by those tasked with bringing justice to the victims and their families. By the time Bernardo and Homolka were formally identified as prime suspects, the investigation had evolved into a complex interplay of evidence, human observation, and intuition. The ordinary suburban landscapes in which they lived, worked, and socialized were scrutinized as extensions of the crime scenes, and the psychological profiles developed by experts guided tactical decisions. Detectives were acutely aware that mistakes could allow further harm or allow the suspects to evade justice, and they approached each step with both caution and determination. The ordinary and the extraordinary had collided in a way that demanded exhaustive attention to detail, relentless analysis, and an unflinching commitment to uncovering the full truth. The breakthrough did not arrive as a flash of revelation, but as the slow convergence of countless threads, each tugged with painstaking care by investigators who had refused to overlook even the smallest anomaly. Weeks of interviews, cross-referencing alibis, analyzing minute details, and reconstructing routines had begun to form a picture of disturbing clarity. The ordinary rhythms of suburban life, once thought to be a refuge, now revealed themselves as a stage meticulously manipulated by two people who understood how to exploit trust, complacency, and expectation. What had seemed like isolated tragedies began to align into a coherent narrative, and for the first time, the investigators sensed that the invisible wall separating suspicion from certainty was beginning to crumble. It began with the recognition of patterns that were subtle yet undeniable. The disappearances, once perceived as random or coincidental, revealed the fingerprints of careful planning. The victims shared more than age and gender, they inhabited spaces accessible to the perpetrators, and their routines were predictable in ways that made them vulnerable. Investigators revisited old case files, and in the margins, small details that had once been dismissed as mundane, a borrowed ride, a casual social visit, a momentary lapse in supervision, suddenly appeared as deliberate openings seized by someone with intimate knowledge of their lives. The ordinary and familiar had become instruments of manipulation, and the investigators, painstakingly piecing together these fragments, began to see the deliberate choreography beneath the surface. The breakthrough was not a singular event but an accumulation of careful observations. One thread led to another, and slowly the investigators constructed a mental map of the suspect's behaviors. Known prior offenses of Paul Bernardo were re-examined, revealing an escalating pattern of predation. His attacks in Scarborough were no longer isolated, they became part of a continuum, a precursor to something more sinister. Investigators traced the evolution of his methods, noting how each prior offense demonstrated increasing audacity, more calculated control, and a clearer understanding of the vulnerabilities of young women. Where once these incidents had seemed disconnected, they now formed a prelude, a rehearsal for the horrors that had yet to be fully revealed. Karla Homolka's role also emerged with greater clarity. Investigators had wrestled with the question of her complicity, her involvement initially shrouded by her youth and the perceived normality of her life. But as evidence mounted, it became impossible to ignore the deliberate actions she had taken. The way she facilitated access to victims, her knowledge of substances and timing, and the preparation of spaces for crime demonstrated a conscious participation that transcended coercion. The ordinary charm and social ease she displayed attending school, chatting with friends, maintaining the appearance of a typical teenager masked a meticulous complicity that investigators now saw in stark relief. Each ordinary gesture, once benign, was reframed as part of a calculated sequence of behaviors, a thread in a web of manipulation that led inexorably to the acts themselves. The physical evidence played a critical role in solidifying the breakthrough. Forensic analysis of materials collected from both crime scenes and the homes of the perpetrators provided incontrovertible links. Minute traces of fibers, fingerprints, and residues established presence and sequence, while the analysis of audiovisual materials offered a direct window into the calculated behaviors of the perpetrators. Investigators pored over these recordings, not merely for the shock of their content, but for patterns, the way the perpetrators interacted with victims, the deliberate staging of rooms, the timing and precision of their movements. Each frame, each fleeting gesture, became a piece of a larger mosaic, revealing the depth of planning and the methodical execution that had previously been hidden beneath layers of normalcy. Connections across jurisdictions became increasingly vital. Police in Scarborough, St. Catharines, and Toronto coordinated, sharing data and insights to trace patterns that spanned both time and geography. Disparate observations, previous complaints, minor reports of suspicious activity, sightings that had seemed inconsequential were re-examined in light of the emerging understanding of the suspect's behaviors. The ordinary record of community life, meticulously maintained in diaries, school logs, and police files, suddenly became a treasure trove of insight. Investigators recognized that these ordinary traces of daily life had been exploited by the perpetrators, and by reversing this exploitation, they could reconstruct the path of predation with astonishing precision. Interviews with those closest to the victims yielded another dimension of insight. Friends, teachers, and family members began to recall seemingly trivial interactions, casual observations, and minor irregularities that had once been forgotten. A mention of a strange ride offered, a remark that seemed innocent at the time, or a shift in routine that had gone unnoticed now carried significant weight. Investigators compiled these recollections, cross-referenced them, and found patterns that had previously been invisible. Ordinary memory, filtered through careful questioning and persistent attention, became a crucial tool in bridging the gap between suspicion and certainty. The breakthrough gained momentum as investigators began to predict behaviors, identifying patterns that suggested the next steps of the perpetrators. The meticulous nature of Paul Bernardo's planning became evident in the spatial arrangements of homes, the selection of victims, and the timing of attacks. He and Karla Homolka had established predictable patterns, routes, routines, and behavioral scripts that investigators could now anticipate. By understanding these routines, law enforcement could anticipate, intervene, and confirm connections between the suspects and the crimes. Each prediction, validated by subsequent observations or evidence, reinforced the coherence of the emerging picture, transforming intuition into a disciplined investigative tool. It was in this phase that the psychological dimensions of the case crystallized. The dynamic between Bernardo and Homolka revealed a disturbing interdependence, one dominated, the other complicit, yet both engaged in the orchestration of violence. Investigators studied the interactions captured on tape, the sequences of coercion and control, and the subtle expressions of manipulation. Each gesture, each pause, each calculated movement spoke volumes about the psychology of domination and submission, revealing a partnership forged in secrecy and cruelty. Understanding this dynamic was essential not only for legal strategy but also for comprehending the mechanisms by which ordinary appearances had masked extraordinary criminality. As the breakthrough solidified, the investigators faced the delicate task of integrating this insight into actionable steps. Surveillance intensified, movements of the suspects were monitored, and additional evidence was sought to ensure that charges could withstand scrutiny in court. Ordinary spaces, homes, streets, and social venues were recontextualized as critical loci of activity, each subject to observation and documentation. Investigators remained vigilant, aware that the slightest misstep could compromise months of painstaking work. The ordinary flow of life had become a chessboard, with each move carefully calculated to anticipate the strategies of the perpetrators and bring the full scope of their actions into the light. By the time law enforcement had amassed sufficient evidence, the breakthrough was not merely a procedural victory but a profound revelation. The seemingly inexplicable tragedies, the deaths and disappearances, were revealed as components of a deliberate and escalating pattern of violence, control, and manipulation. The ordinary masks of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka were stripped away, exposing the meticulous planning, the calculated cruelty, and the chilling normalcy with which they had executed their crimes. The detectives could finally speak with certainty about the connections between victims, the methods of predation, and the complicity of both perpetrators, forming a coherent and devastating narrative of criminal behavior. The breakthrough also carried a human dimension that weighed heavily on the investigators. For the families of the victims, it meant the first glimmer of understanding after months of confusion and grief. For the detectives, it was a vindication of exhaustive labor, sleepless nights, and relentless attention to the smallest details. Every observation painstakingly recorded, every minor lead pursued, and every anomalous detail scrutinized had contributed to a moment of clarity that now allowed the pursuit of justice to move forward with precision and purpose. The breakthrough was both technical and emotional, bridging the gap between investigation and resolution, between confusion and comprehension. In the final analysis, the breakthrough demonstrated the convergence of science, psychology, intuition, and human perseverance. It was the culmination of tireless work, attention to the mundane as well as the extraordinary, and the disciplined reconstruction of behaviors that had, for too long, hidden behind ordinary appearances. From the smallest fiber to the largest narrative pattern, from minor observations to overarching behavioral trends, the investigation coalesced into a complete understanding of how two seemingly ordinary individuals could orchestrate acts of profound cruelty. The breakthrough was the point at which the invisible became visible, the fragmented became coherent, and the ordinary facade was shattered to reveal the true nature of the crime. With the breakthrough achieved, the investigation could now proceed toward confrontation, accountability, and legal reckoning. The painstaking accumulation of evidence and insight had prepared investigators for the next phase, the apprehension, interrogation, and eventual prosecution of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. Ordinary life, once manipulated and violated, was now a source of clarity, guiding authorities toward the resolution of a case that had terrified a nation and exposed the fragile boundary between safety and horror. The breakthrough marked the pivot from uncertainty to certainty, from suspicion to knowledge, and from grief to the possibility of justice finally served. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the suburban streets, quiet streets, and familiar homes where ordinary life had once unfolded. The high ceilings and muted tones of the Ontario courthouse seemed to amplify every movement, every whisper, and every shuffle of paper. The air carried the tension of anticipation, of grief, and of judgment yet to be rendered. Families of the victims sat in silence, their faces a mixture of sorrow and vigilance, hands clenched or resting tensely on knees. Friends and extended family members of the accused sat separately, constrained by both law and the invisible weight of suspicion. The gallery itself, filled with members of the public and journalists, seemed to hold its collective breath as if aware that within these walls, the boundary between ordinary human existence and incomprehensible cruelty would be laid bare. From the moment proceedings began, the atmosphere was taut with unease. The judge, robed in austere black, presided with a detached authority, yet even their presence could not mask the emotional charge that rippled through the courtroom. Attorneys moved with deliberate precision, presenting evidence, questioning witnesses, and articulating arguments with both rhetorical skill and strategic calculation. Every word mattered, every pause was measured, and the cadence of speech seemed to carry the weight of life and death, justice and failure. The ordinary procedural rhythm of a trial, calling witnesses, presenting exhibits, and reading statements, was transformed into a tense narrative of horror, deception, and betrayal that demanded both intellectual engagement and emotional endurance from everyone present. The prosecution opened by carefully reconstructing the sequence of events, presenting a tapestry of evidence that spanned years of investigation. Each victim's story was retold with painstaking detail, emphasizing the ordinary moments that had been manipulated, the patterns of coercion, and the deliberate cruelty that characterized the crimes. Witnesses described not just what had happened, but how the ordinary was turned extraordinary. A bedroom became a scene of manipulation, a familiar street became a conduit for predation, and casual social interactions became instruments of control. The weight of this narrative settled heavily on the courtroom, framing the accused not merely as violators of law, but as architects of fear, deception, and suffering. The presentation of evidence was meticulous and deliberate. Investigators recounted the forensic findings, linking fibers, residues, and fingerprints to specific locations and actions. Photographs, diagrams, and timelines were introduced to guide the jury through a complex web of facts, connecting seemingly disparate details into a coherent narrative. Audiovisual material, though handled with sensitivity, illustrated behaviors and interactions that made the orchestrated nature of the crimes undeniable. Each frame, each image, and each documented gesture became part of a growing edifice of proof, demonstrating not only the actions of the perpetrators but also the deliberation, planning, and control underlying them. The ordinary details of daily life were exposed as instruments of manipulation, their familiarity accentuating the calculated cruelty of the crimes. Witness testimony added another layer of complexity, bringing the human dimension into sharp relief. Friends and family of the victims recounted ordinary routines interrupted, conversations left incomplete, and absences that had seemed insignificant but now carried the weight of tragedy. Schoolmates described moments of friendship, fleeting exchanges, and laughter that had been stolen by circumstances beyond their control. The prosecution emphasized the contrast between these ordinary interactions and the extraordinary violation that had been imposed upon them. The emotional resonance of these testimonies was palpable, compelling the jury and spectators alike to confront both the human cost and the methodical nature of the crimes. The defense, for its part, sought to navigate a precarious terrain. In the case of Karla Homolka, the argument centered on claims of coercion, limited understanding, and the assertion that her involvement had been compelled by the more dominant Paul Bernardo. Her youth and outward appearance of innocence were highlighted, emphasizing the discrepancy between perception and culpability. Attorneys carefully parsed her actions, attempting to frame them within a narrative of influence rather than active predation. The courtroom tension intensified as the defense presented a humanizing portrait of a young woman caught in circumstances beyond her control, juxtaposed against the mounting evidence of her complicity. Bernardo's defense, in contrast, faced little room for mitigation. His prior offenses, documented history, and the premeditated nature of the crimes left little ambiguity in the prosecution's narrative. Attorneys focused on procedural nuances, challenging the admissibility of certain evidence, questioning the methods of collection, and scrutinizing witness credibility. Yet the sheer weight of material evidence, physical, testimonial, and audiovisual, presented a formidable challenge. The juxtaposition of ordinary charm, social normality, and methodical cruelty was central to the prosecution's case, leaving Bernardo's defense struggling to reconcile appearances with documented behaviors. The courtroom itself became a stage on which the interplay between narrative, evidence, and emotion was starkly visible. Observers noted the reactions of jurors, the subtle shifts in posture, the tightening of jaws, and the furrowing of brows. Every gesture was amplified by the charged environment, a reminder that justice was being pursued not only through legal arguments but also through the collective processing of horror and grief. Attorneys, witnesses, and even the judge had to navigate this landscape carefully, balancing the imperative of fact-based argumentation with the undeniable emotional impact of the crimes. The turning point of the trial came as key evidence was presented that made the orchestration of the crimes undeniable. Detailed analysis of the videos, corroborated by forensic findings, demonstrated a sequence of actions that could not be explained as accidental or incidental. The calculated use of substances, the manipulation of trust, and the methodical planning became central to the narrative of guilt. For Karla Homolka, these revelations complicated her defense, showing active participation that went beyond coerced compliance. For Bernardo, they confirmed the extent of premeditation, control, and sadistic intent. The ordinary contexts, the family home, familiar streets, and everyday social interactions had been weaponized in ways that left little room for doubt about their conscious involvement. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on families and observers became increasingly visible. Parents of the victims alternated between periods of composed observation and moments of raw grief. Siblings and close friends of the victims were forced to confront evidence of unimaginable acts, reliving sequences that had previously been confined to memory or speculation. The courtroom, though a place of formal procedure, became a vessel for collective mourning, a site where private trauma intersected with public accountability. The ordinary rituals of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal argumentation were suffused with the extraordinary weight of human suffering, transforming each proceeding into an encounter with both justice and memory. The verdicts brought both resolution and ongoing controversy. Paul Bernardo was found guilty of multiple counts of murder and sexual assault, receiving life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence reflected the calculated cruelty, methodical planning, and the extreme nature of his crimes, affirming the prosecution's narrative and bringing a measure of closure to the families. Karla Homolka's sentence, by contrast, reflected a controversial plea deal reached during the investigation. She received a 12-year sentence, ultimately serving 7, which sparked widespread public debate over the ethics of plea bargains, cooperation with authorities, and the assessment of complicity in cases of extreme violence. The contrast between the sentences highlighted the complexities of legal strategy, moral judgment, and societal expectations of justice. In the aftermath of the trial, the emotional and social reverberations were profound. Families of the victims grappled with relief, anger, and continued grief, navigating the complexities of mourning in the shadow of public scrutiny. Communities wrestled with a renewed awareness of vulnerability, the fragility of ordinary safety, and the challenges of detecting calculated manipulation beneath everyday appearances. Media coverage reflected both the need for accountability and the tension inherent in balancing sensitivity with the public's desire for information. The ordinary rhythms of life, work, school, and social engagement were forever altered by the knowledge that such deliberate cruelty could coexist with seemingly normal suburban life. The trial also catalyzed broader legal and societal reflection. Questions arose regarding the handling of accomplices, the ethics of plea bargains, and the responsibilities of law enforcement in detecting early signs of escalating criminal behavior. The contrast between the sentences imposed on Bernardo and Homolka fueled public debate about fairness, accountability, and the interpretation of complicity. At the same time, the trial reinforced the necessity of meticulous investigation, careful evidence collection, and the integration of psychological insight into legal proceedings. Ordinary law, procedure, and civic structures were tested against extraordinary acts, revealing both strengths and limitations in the pursuit of justice. Ultimately, the trial of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka was not merely a legal proceeding, it was a confrontation with human cruelty, the manipulation of ordinary life, and the capacity for deception to coexist with social normality. It was a stage on which grief, justice, morality, and the pursuit of truth intersected, demanding both rigorous analysis and profound emotional resilience. The verdicts, though imperfect in the eyes of some, represented a formal acknowledgement of guilt, a societal affirmation that deliberate harm would not be ignored, and a framework for understanding how ordinary lives could be exploited by extraordinary cruelty. The courtroom, in all its austere solemnity, bore witness to both the darkest capacities of human behavior and the painstaking processes through which accountability could be achieved. The echoes of the trial lingered long after the gavel had fallen, reverberating through the lives of those directly affected and the wider Canadian public. The ordinary streets of Ontario, once suffused with routine rhythms and the comforting familiarity of daily life, now seemed shadowed by memory and suspicion. Families returned to homes that were the same in structure yet forever changed in significance, aware that spaces once considered safe had been invaded, manipulated, and turned into instruments of horror. Every corner of suburban existence carried a residual tension, a subtle questioning of who could be trusted and what ordinary appearances might conceal. For those who had loved the victims, the legal verdicts offered a measure of closure but could not erase the trauma etched deeply into memory, the persistent sense of loss, or the haunting images that had intruded into the fabric of their lives. The emotional aftermath was a landscape of contradictions. Relief and grief, vindication and frustration, justice and incompleteness all coexisted in uneasy proximity. Parents and siblings of Tammy Homolka, Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French faced the daily negotiation between the legal acknowledgement of guilt and the lived reality of absence. Ordinary moments, a family meal, a birthday celebration, or a quiet evening at home, were punctuated by sudden recollections of what had been lost, of lives interrupted too soon, and of the violent intrusion that had shattered childhood innocence. Each ordinary gesture could trigger memory, each familiar setting could recall absence, creating a persistent interplay between continuity and rupture, between everyday life and the extraordinary horror that had penetrated it. For Carla Homolka, the aftermath was complex and controversial. The public's perception of her, shaped by media portrayals and the unprecedented nature of her plea deal, oscillated between condemnation and fascination. Many could not reconcile her appearance and demeanor with the crimes she had participated in, yet the evidence of her involvement was undeniable. The ethical debates surrounding her sentence and early release became a touchstone for broader societal questions: the limits of legal leniency, the assessment of complicity, and the responsibilities of justice systems when dealing with accomplices in cases of extreme violence. Her reintegration into society, monitored and scrutinized, underscored the tension between punishment, rehabilitation, and public safety, highlighting the challenges inherent in navigating the legal and moral dimensions of extraordinary crime. Paul Bernardo's incarceration, by contrast, was absolute, his life defined by isolation, control, and the unrelenting consequences of his actions. Within the prison system, he became a symbol of calculated cruelty and unrepentant violence, the embodiment of the meticulous and predatory behaviors that had terrorized Ontario for years. His continued confinement served both as a mechanism of justice and a societal assertion that certain acts could not be forgiven or mitigated. Yet even within the walls of incarceration, the echoes of his crimes persisted, reminding families, investigators, and the public that the impact of calculated cruelty extends beyond the immediate moment, reverberating across time, space, and human consciousness. The broader societal reflection was equally profound. Canadians grappled with the realization that the ordinary, routine family life, suburban neighborhoods, friendly acquaintances, could conceal extraordinary danger. Public discussions centered on safety, the responsibilities of guardianship, and the capacity for ordinary appearances to mask extreme behavior. Schools, community organizations, and families re-evaluated the assumptions of trust and familiarity, implementing measures to protect adolescents and to recognize early warning signs of predatory behavior. The case became a lens through which ordinary citizens confronted the fragility of social trust, the potential for manipulation, and the mechanisms by which evil can exploit normalcy. Media coverage played a dual role in shaping public perception and collective memory. Journalists documented every development with meticulous attention, simultaneously informing and sensationalizing, contextualizing and dramatizing. The moniker Ken and Barbie killers captured public imagination, a shorthand that both trivialized and underscored the grotesque normality of the perpetrators. Yet beyond the nickname lay deeper truths, a nation grappling with shock, grief, and the challenge of reconciling ordinary appearances with extraordinary acts. The reporting influenced policy, discourse, and public consciousness, reminding Canadians that the intersection of criminal investigation, societal vigilance, and media representation carries significant consequences for collective understanding of justice and human behavior. The legal and procedural ramifications extended beyond the individual case. The plea bargain that allowed Karla Homolka early release prompted widespread scrutiny of prosecutorial discretion, cooperation agreements, and the ethical boundaries of legal strategy. Lawmakers and legal scholars debated the appropriate balance between incentivizing cooperation and ensuring proportional punishment, recognizing the tension between pragmatic investigation and societal expectations of moral accountability. Policy discussions regarding the handling of accomplices in violent crimes, the assessment of coercion versus agency, and the transparency of legal proceedings were directly influenced by the visibility and controversy of the Bernardo Homolka case. The ordinary frameworks of law were challenged, tested, and ultimately reshaped by the extraordinary circumstances of these crimes. Psychological and criminological analysis also flourished in the aftermath. Experts examined the dynamic between Bernardo and Homolka, the mechanisms of coercion and complicity, and the patterns of predation that had allowed their crimes to escalate. Studies of adolescent victimization, relational manipulation, and the intersection of ordinary domestic spaces with criminal activity informed both academic understanding and practical approaches to prevention. Community awareness programs, school-based education, and training for law enforcement officers evolved in response, emphasizing the importance of recognizing subtle cues, understanding behavioral escalation, and addressing the intersection of psychological dynamics with physical evidence. The case became a seminal example in criminology, illustrating the interplay between calculated criminal behavior and the social structures within which it operates. The passage of time did little to erase the emotional residue. Anniversaries of disappearances, media retrospectives, and public discussions served as reminders that grief is neither linear nor finite. Families maintained memorials, held ceremonies, and engaged in advocacy, transforming personal tragedy into efforts to protect others and ensure that the lessons of horror were not forgotten. Ordinary acts, lighting a candle, visiting a school, or sharing stories, became acts of remembrance, affirmation, and resistance against the invisibility of past suffering. The intersection of personal memory and collective consciousness became a crucial site for both healing and vigilance. Yet even as the extraordinary nature of the crimes remained in public consciousness, ordinary life persisted. Streets were walked, schools attended, families gathered, and communities reconstituted themselves around new routines. The memory of violence coexisted with the daily rhythms of survival, illustrating the resilience of human life even in the shadow of horror. The interplay between ordinary existence and the residual impact of extraordinary acts became a defining characteristic of the aftermath, shaping not only individual experience but also societal understanding of vulnerability, accountability, and recovery. Ultimately, the aftermath of the Bernardo Homolka case is a testament to the complex interplay of justice, grief, memory, and societal vigilance. It demonstrates how ordinary life can be exploited, how trust can be manipulated, and how calculated evil can hide in plain sight. At the same time, it underscores the perseverance of law enforcement, the resilience of families,